Betrayed, broken, reborn. A man's ultimate revenge and redemption. The numbers on the screen blurred together, a sea of red drowning Michael's vision. He adjusted his glasses, blinking hard, but the reality didn't change. The bank account balance stared back at him, mocking him. The mortgage, the bills, the dwindling savings. It was all there, a slow-motion disaster, unfolding right in front of him. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He had done everything right, or at least he thought he had. A stable career, a good salary, a home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. 2 beautiful children. A wife he had loved, trusted, built a life with. And yet here he was, drowning. The clock on his desk read 9:47 p.m. when the front door lock clicked open. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He knew the sound of Jennifer's footsteps as she entered, knew the way she tossed her purse onto the console table, the way she kicked off her heels without bending down. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. Instead, he listened. The rustle of her coat as she draped it over the chair. The faint sound of ice clinking as she poured herself a drink. The refrigerator door opening, then closing. Finally, her voice, flat, emotionless. Did the kids go to bed? Michael's fingers curled into a fist. The kids. Not our kids. Just the kids. They've been asleep for hours, he replied, his voice just as distant. Jennifer hummed a vague response, neither interested nor surprised. A few years ago, she would have rushed in to kiss them goodnight, whispering stories in the dark until they drifted off. Now, she barely remembered to ask. Michael turned in his chair, watching as she leaned against the kitchen counter, glass of whiskey in hand. She looked exhausted, but not in the way he was. Not the bone-deep, soul-draining exhaustion of a man fighting to keep everything together. Hers was a different kind of tired, the kind that came from keeping secrets. He had noticed it months ago, the way she avoided his gaze, the way she pulled away when he touched her. The late nights, the half-hearted excuses, the way she suddenly cared about the way she looked before leaving the house, even on days she claimed to be swamped at work. She was slipping away, piece by piece. And Michael had a sinking feeling that someone else was catching those pieces. Still, he had played along, pretending not to notice the perfume that wasn't his. The text messages she always cleared. The extra care she put into her appearance before company dinners. Maybe he had been waiting for her to say it. Maybe he had hoped she wouldn't. But when she finally spoke, it still hit him like a gunshot to the chest. Michael, I want a divorce. The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The room seemed smaller, the walls pressing in. Michael stared at her, not sure what he expected to see in her face. Regret? Pain? Anything? But no, just cold indifference. For a long time, he didn't say anything. He simply let the words settle, absorbing them, turning them over in his mind. 17 years of marriage, reduced to 5 words. Jennifer sighed, setting her glass down. I didn't want to do this like this, but Michael held up a hand, cutting her off. Spare me. She blinked, not in guilt, not in remorse, in mild surprise, as if she expected him to beg, to fall apart, to demand answers. But Michael didn't. Instead, he felt something else, something unexpected. Relief. A bitter, almost laughable relief. He had been bracing for this moment for months, maybe even years, and now that it was finally here, the weight in his chest didn't feel as heavy as he thought it would. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. We can figure things out amicably, she said, as if she were discussing the logistics of returning a defective appliance. For the kids. For both of us. Michael studied her, really studied her. The woman he had once adored, once trusted with everything. The woman who used to be his home. But now she was just another person in the room. He nodded slowly. Fine. Jennifer blinked again. This time, she wasn't surprised. She was thrown off. She had been expecting resistance. A fight. Tears. Anything but acceptance. But Michael was done fighting for someone who had stopped fighting for him a long time ago. He turned back to his computer, fingers resting on the keyboard. The numbers on the screen hadn't changed. The debt was still there. The mess of his life still loomed over him. But suddenly, he wasn't afraid anymore. Because for the first time in years, Michael knew exactly what he had to do. Michael hadn't always been this hollow version of himself. There was a time when he had dreams, ambitions, when he had control. Once, he had been a man of purpose, a brilliant programmer, climbing the corporate ladder with steady hands and a sharp mind. He had built systems, solved impossible problems, and earned the respect of his peers. He had provided for his family, given Jennifer a beautiful home, and ensured their children had every opportunity to thrive. But success is a fragile thing. It can vanish as quickly as it comes. The layoff had been a slow death. He saw the signs months before it happened. The canceled meetings, the distant looks from upper management, the whispered conversations that stopped the moment he entered the room. He knew the company was shifting, tightening its belt, looking for places to cut costs. And then, one ordinary Wednesday afternoon, his name had been called. "We appreciate everything you've done for the company, Michael." A handshake, a severance package, a polite but firm escort out the door. And just like that, 17 years of work, his identity was gone. He had driven home in a daze, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind raced with solutions. He would find another job. He would bounce back. He had to. But when he walked through the front door, Jennifer barely looked up from her phone. "I lost my job," he had said, his voice hoarse. She blinked, as if he had told her the weather report. "That sucks," she said flatly. Then, after a pause, "What are you going to do?" What was he going to do? He had expected concern, comfort, maybe even anger on his behalf. But there was nothing. No warmth, no reassurance, no embrace. Just a cold detachment that chilled him to the bone. In the weeks that followed, Michael spiraled. He sent out resumes, networked with old colleagues, and scoured job boards late into the night. But the job market was brutal. He was in his 40s now, competing with younger, cheaper talent. The rejection emails piled up. The interviews, when he got them, led nowhere. Meanwhile, Jennifer flourished. She had started her marketing job as a part-time gig, something to keep herself busy. But after Michael's layoff, she began working longer hours, spending more and more time at the office. The distance between them widened. At first, Michael assumed she was just picking up the slack, that she was stepping in to help. But something felt off. She no longer asked how his day was. She no longer touched him at night. When he reached for her, she flinched, as if his hands were foreign. The late nights became more frequent, the excuses more rehearsed. Then came the moment that shattered his delusions. It was his birthday. He hadn't expected much, a quiet dinner, a cake, maybe a small gift. Jennifer had been distant lately, but surely she would make an effort. But as the evening wore on, it became clear she had no plans. She handed him a generic sweater, still in the store bag, and muttered, "Happy birthday." That was it. He forced a smile, nodding, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending he didn't notice the absence of love in her voice. Later that night, he went to the closet to put the sweater away. That's when he saw it. A small, elegant pink gift box, neatly wrapped, hidden beneath her clothes. His heart leapt. Maybe she does care. Maybe she was saving something special for later. He reached for it, hands trembling with anticipation. And then he saw the note. "To my beloved one." Not to Michael. Not to my husband. Just beloved one. His stomach twisted into a knot so tight he could barely breathe. He stood there, frozen, staring at those 3 words, feeling the weight of 17 years collapse around him. The next morning, there was no second gift, no surprise. Jennifer kissed his cheek absent-mindedly before heading to work, leaving him alone in a house that suddenly felt like a stranger's. That was the moment Michael knew. Jennifer was having an affair. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, gripping the closet door, his vision blurred with the crushing realization. But one thing was certain. The life he had built, the marriage he had fought for, was over. Michael sat in the dim glow of his desk lamp, the room around him heavy with silence. A spreadsheet flickered on his screen, filled with meaningless numbers he couldn't bring himself to care about. His mind wasn't on work, nor on the bills piling up on the counter. It was somewhere darker, somewhere bitter and sharp-edged. He drummed his fingers against the desk, staring at the whiskey glass beside him, half empty. His jaw tightened. Jennifer was hiding something. At first, he had dismissed his suspicions as paranoia, just the anxious byproducts of a crumbling marriage. But the signs were undeniable now. The way she avoided his gaze, the way she seemed permanently glued to her phone, smiling at messages she never shared, the scent of cologne that wasn't his, the subtle, almost imperceptible way she pulled away when he reached for her. And then there was the gift. It had been a stupid mistake on her part, really, leaving it there, tucked inside the closet behind a row of winter coats. Michael had found it accidentally while searching for an old sweater. A sleek black box wrapped in soft pink ribbon. His heart had pounded in his chest as he picked it up, turning it over in his hands. He had never been the type to pry, to dig through his wife's things like some insecure teenager. But this wasn't prying, this was confirmation. Slowly, methodically, he pulled the ribbon loose and opened the box. Inside, nestled in delicate tissue paper, was a set of lacy, expensive lingerie, the kind Jennifer hadn't worn for him in years. Alongside, it was a handwritten note on elegant cardstock. "For my beloved one, can't wait to see you in this." There was no name, no signature, but Michael didn't need one. A cold wave of nausea crashed over him. He sat there for a long time, staring at the box, feeling his body go numb. Maybe she had bought it for herself. He tried to reason. Maybe it was for him. Maybe there was a logical explanation. But deep down, in that raw, brutal place of truth, he knew it wasn't for him. That realization felt like a knife twisting inside him. He replaced the lid carefully, as if handling something fragile, something that could cut him if he wasn't careful. He rewrapped the ribbon with steady hands, slid the box back into its hiding place, and stood there in the darkened bedroom, breathing heavily. Everything after that became a blur. Michael's fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly as he stared at the upscale restaurant from across the street. His car sat in the shadows, engine off, the world outside moving in slow motion. Jennifer had left earlier that evening, dressed in a sleek black dress he hadn't seen before. "It's Alan's birthday," she had said casually, swiping on lipstick in the mirror. "I'll be home late." Alan Henderson. Michael had met him once. A young, arrogant executive at Jennifer's marketing firm. He had shaken Michael's hand with a firm grip, given him a confident, almost too confident smile. He was everything Michael wasn't: charming, ambitious, thriving. And Jennifer had laughed at his jokes. That alone had been enough to plant the first seed of doubt. Now, watching the restaurant, Michael felt the doubt crystallize into certainty. Through the wide glass windows, he could see the guests milling about, clinking wine glasses, laughing in warm candlelight. And then there she was, Jennifer. His stomach clenched. She stood close to Alan, leaning in slightly, her expression soft in a way Michael hadn't seen in years. Alan placed a hand on the small of her back as he whispered something in her ear. She laughed, tilting her head, touching his arm. A casual observer might see two colleagues enjoying themselves at a party. Michael saw everything. His hands trembled, not with rage, but with something colder, something deeper. He wasn't a fool anymore. He had been watching. For weeks, he had noted the late nights, the secretive smiles, the way she had started wearing perfume again, the growing distance between them, like a canyon widening, threatening to collapse entirely. And now, he had his answer. The box was gone. Michael had checked before leaving the house. The pink ribbon, the sleek black box, it had disappeared. Jennifer had given it to him. Michael exhaled slowly, willing himself to stay calm. There was no confrontation to be had tonight. No dramatic outburst. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Michael didn't remember driving home. He only remembered the crushing weight in his chest, the realization that 17 years of marriage had been built on a foundation that was already cracked beyond repair. He poured himself a drink the moment he walked through the door, gulping it down without even tasting it. The alcohol burned, but it wasn't enough to numb the storm inside him. The sound of the front door unlocking sent a jolt through his system. Jennifer walked in, heels clicking against the floor, the scent of wine and perfume trailing after her. She looked surprised to see him still awake. "You're up late," she remarked, slipping off her coat. Her tone was casual, too casual. Michael set his glass down carefully. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." She nodded, not really paying attention. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at it briefly before tucking it away. Michael watched her closely. He could have confronted her right then. Shouted, accused, demanded answers. But what was the point? She would deny it. She would call him crazy, gaslight him, make him feel like he was the one breaking their marriage apart. No, that wasn't how this would go. Jennifer disappeared into the bathroom, and Michael sat there, silent, fingers tapping against the armrest. A slow, knowing smirk curled on his lips. He wouldn't break. She would. And when she did, he would be ready. Michael sat in the dimly lit corner of a downtown cafe, his fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee. The bitterness burned his tongue, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, calculating, strategizing. His whole life had been about numbers, patterns, and logic, and now, for the first time in years, he felt the thrill of a challenge. The lawyer had been blunt. Without solid proof of infidelity, you'll be looking at an equal split, assets, savings, maybe even alimony. And depending on how things go, custody of the kids could be contested. Michael had sat there, swallowing his anger, his fingers pressing into the leather armrest of the chair. He had expected some unfairness, but hearing it laid out in clinical terms made it all the more infuriating. Jennifer could walk away with half of everything he had built after destroying their marriage, after throwing him aside like an old appliance. But what if there was nothing left to take? The thought had struck him like lightning, igniting something cold and calculating deep within him. Jennifer wanted a fresh start? Fine, but she wouldn't get it at his expense. And so, Michael began his game. The first step was simple: make the money disappear. Not overnight, of course. That would be too obvious. Instead, it had to be slow, methodical, just enough to go unnoticed until it was too late. His first major move was securing the kids' future. He met with a financial advisor, carefully shifting a large portion of their savings into education accounts that Jennifer couldn't legally access. No judge would ever question a father ensuring his children's future. Next, he made questionable investments. A new luxury SUV. On paper, a foolish purchase for a man in his situation. But in reality, it was fully paid off, an asset he could sell later if needed. Then came the smaller withdrawals. Every few days, a little at a time, he pulled cash from their accounts, stashing it in a fireproof safe hidden in the garage. He could almost hear Jennifer's complaints in his head. "Michael, we need to be more responsible with money. Michael, you need to find another job." Oh, how she would scream when she realized the money was gone. Money was one thing. Proof was another. Michael needed to confirm his suspicions, to gather irrefutable evidence of Jennifer's betrayal. He hired a private investigator. It felt surreal, like something out of a crime novel, but it was necessary. The PI was a no-nonsense man in his 50s, a former detective who had seen it all. He took the case without judgment, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Standard package," the man had said, sliding a contract across the table. "Surveillance, photography, phone logs if needed. You'll know everything." Michael signed without hesitation. The wait was excruciating. Days passed in agonizing silence. Jennifer remained her usual self, distant, cold, disinterested. But now, Michael saw her in a different light. Every late night, every unexplained meeting, every secretive text message, it was all so obvious. How had he not seen it before? Then, one evening, an email arrived. Subject: Surveillance report. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he clicked on the attachment. And there it was. Photos, text logs, hotel reservations. Jennifer and Alan. Together. Intimate. Smiling. Proof. Michael leaned back in his chair, staring at the images, his emotions strangely muted. The rage he had expected to feel never came. Instead, there was only a cold, quiet certainty. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about winning. Michael needed to time everything perfectly. The financial drain had to be nearly complete before Jennifer filed for divorce, or before he confronted her. If she caught wind of his actions too soon, she could retaliate, maybe even accuse him of hiding assets. So, he played the part. He acted oblivious, going through the motions of their failing marriage, pretending not to notice her absences. He feigned exhaustion when she made passive-aggressive comments about him not contributing enough. Every now and then, he'd casually mention job interviews that didn't exist, leaving her with the impression that he was struggling. Let her believe she had the upper hand. Meanwhile, he made sure to be the perfect father, attending every soccer game, every school meeting, strengthening his bond with the kids. If Jennifer wanted to fight for custody, she'd have to go through hell to take them from him. And just to add a little more insurance, he met with a forensic accountant, just in case he needed to prove where every dollar had gone. Jennifer had no idea what was coming. Michael stood in front of the mirror one night, studying himself. For months, he had felt like a victim of his circumstances, of Jennifer's betrayal, of his own inaction. But now, he saw something else in his reflection. Control. Power. A man who wasn't about to let his life be destroyed. Jennifer wanted out? She would get it, but she would leave with nothing. Michael smiled to himself, a slow, calculated smirk. The game was on. Michael sat alone in the dim light of his office, the only sound in the room the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. A thick folder lay open on the desk in front of him, filled with photographs, receipts, and phone records. Proof. Cold, undeniable proof. His fingers traced the edge of a glossy photo, a candid shot of Jennifer and Alan in a parking garage. The way they stood close, her hand resting lightly on his chest, the way she looked up at him with a softness she hadn't shown Michael in years. He should have been furious. He should have wanted to throw the folder across the room, to scream, to break something. But all he felt was emptiness, a vast, hollow space where his love for Jennifer used to be. Michael reached for the tumbler of whiskey beside him and took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in his chest. He flipped through the evidence methodically, as if analyzing lines of code in a broken program. Each page added another nail to the coffin of their marriage. Hotel receipts, weekly rendezvous at the Rosewood Suites, call logs, late-night conversations, always when he was asleep, restaurant bills, expensive dinners paid for with the joint account, their money. The betrayal was so calculated, so effortless. Had she ever hesitated? Had she ever felt guilt? Or had she convinced herself that Michael was the villain, that she deserved this? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The man he had been a year ago would have crumbled under this truth. But that man no longer existed. In his place stood someone colder, sharper, more precise. This wasn't about revenge. This was about control. And Jennifer had no idea she had already lost. He had learned to wear a mask. At breakfast the next morning, he watched Jennifer move around the kitchen, sipping her coffee as if she hadn't just spent the night in another man's arms. She was an actress in her own carefully crafted illusion, a woman who had convinced herself that she was still in control. Michael played his part well. He asked about her work, nodded at her excuses, even smiled at the appropriate moments. The act was almost effortless. But then Jennifer said something that made his grip tighten around his coffee mug. "You don't look well, Michael," she said, tilting her head. There was something in her tone, almost amused, as if she could sense his unraveling, as if she enjoyed it. He met her gaze, holding it a fraction too long. The urge to tell her everything, to shove the folder in her face and watch her world collapse, was overwhelming. But he didn't. Instead, he smiled. "No, darling," he said smoothly. "Nothing at all." And for the first time, Jennifer hesitated. Over the next few weeks, the noose tightened around Jennifer's neck. She just didn't know it yet. Michael drained the accounts with careful precision, ensuring there was nothing left for her to claim when she finally made her move. He met with the best divorce lawyer in the city, not to fight, but to outmaneuver. There would be no dramatic courtroom battle, no drawn-out legal war. Jennifer would walk into their divorce expecting to win. She would leave with nothing. And then, the final stroke. Michael had been patient, but now it was time to tip the first domino. One simple email, sent from an anonymous account. One carefully chosen recipient, Melissa Henderson, Alan's wife. The subject line was simple: "You deserve to know the truth." The attached photos would do the rest. Michael had spent months carefully dismantling the life he and Jennifer had built together, piece by piece, ensuring that when the final hammer fell, it would land squarely on her. Now, standing in the middle of their once shared home, he could feel the tension hanging in the air like a storm about to break. The walls still held memories, pictures of their wedding, of vacations taken in happier times, of birthdays where laughter had echoed through these rooms. But Michael felt nothing for them anymore. That life was dead. Jennifer, however, had no idea just how dead it was. She stood across from him in the kitchen, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expensive gold bracelet catching the dim kitchen light. The same bracelet Michael had once gifted her, when he had still been the devoted husband, the provider, the fool. Now, she was looking at him with barely concealed disdain, as if she had already won. "I've spoken to my lawyer," she said, her voice cool and confident. "We're going to finalize everything by next month. The sooner we end this, the better." Michael didn't respond immediately. He sipped his coffee, letting the silence stretch until Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. "You're awfully sure of yourself," he said finally, setting his mug down. Jennifer rolled her eyes. "Michael, let's not drag this out. We both know how this is going to end. You don't have a job. I do. The court will see that I'm a stable parent. And financially, I'll get what I'm entitled to. Half of everything." She smiled, tilting her head slightly, as if she were bestowing mercy upon him. Michael smiled back, a slow, deliberate smile. She had no idea. 3 days later, the call came. Michael was at a cafe, sipping his morning espresso, when Jennifer's number flashed on his screen. He let it ring out. Then another call, and another. He finally answered on the fourth. "What?" The sound of raw panic filled the line. "Where's the money, Michael?" she demanded. Michael took a slow sip of his coffee, savoring the moment. "What money?" "The accounts. Our savings. The investments. They're gone. What the hell did you do?" Jennifer's voice cracked, and for the first time in years, Michael heard real fear in it. Not annoyance, not exasperation. Fear. He closed his eyes, breathing in the satisfaction. "I had expenses," he said finally. "We had expenses." "Bullshit. You spent everything." Michael shrugged, though she couldn't see it. "Well, I lost my job. Times got tough." A heavy silence. Then, more carefully, "Are you telling me there's nothing left?" Michael leaned back in his chair. "Not for you, no." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. He could picture her now, pacing the floor, gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "You did this on purpose." Michael chuckled. "Prove it." She let out a strangled curse before the call disconnected. He set his phone down, feeling lighter than he had in years. Jennifer thought she had lost everything. She was wrong. The worst was yet to come. 2 weeks later, the affair became public knowledge. Michael had insured it. The private investigator's folder, filled with photos, receipts, and text logs, found its way into Alan Henderson's wife's hands. And when a scorned wife learns her husband has been screwing his employee behind her back, well, hell hath no fury. Within days, Alan's wife had filed for divorce, demanding half of his assets. Word spread like wildfire. Alan, facing a scandal he couldn't contain, was placed on an immediate leave of absence. Jennifer, by extension, became a liability. And then came the final twist of fate. She was fired. Not officially for the affair, of course. The company cited corporate restructuring. But everyone knew the truth. The whispers in the office halls, the avoidance of eye contact, the way her colleagues suddenly treated her like a leper. Michael received another call that night. Jennifer didn't scream this time. She was crying. "I lost my job," she whispered, her voice small. "Alan's divorcing his wife. She's taking everything. And now I have nothing." Michael listened, waiting. She hesitated, then broke down completely. "Michael, I made a mistake." He let that sink in. For years, he had imagined this moment. The moment she would realize what she had done, the moment she would come crawling back, desperate and broken. And yet, now that it was here, he felt nothing. Jennifer wasn't his problem anymore. Michael let out a slow breath. "Yes, you did." Silence. Then, a shaky, "Can we talk?" Michael smiled to himself. "No, Jennifer," he said calmly. "We can't." And with that, he hung up. Outside, the city lights burned bright, promising a new beginning. And for the first time in years, Michael walked forward without looking back. The sky was a soft shade of amber as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over Michael's new home, a modest but elegant house in a quiet neighborhood. The laughter of his children echoed from the backyard, a sound that had become more frequent since the divorce was finalized. It was a sound he had once feared he might never hear again. Michael sat on the porch, a cup of black coffee steaming in his hands. He had grown to enjoy these quiet moments, the simple pleasure of a peaceful evening without the suffocating tension that had filled his old life. He was no longer a man shackled by betrayal, no longer drowning in bitterness. He had rebuilt himself, piece by piece. Then his phone rang. For a moment, he simply stared at the screen. The name flashing on it was one he hadn't seen in months. Jennifer. He let the phone ring a few more times before answering, his voice calm and measured. "Hello." There was silence on the other end, long enough that he might have thought she'd change her mind. But then she spoke. "Michael." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" Michael took a slow breath, leaning back in his chair. He could hear something in her voice, something he hadn't heard in years. Defeat. Once, he would have longed for this moment, for Jennifer to realize what she had lost, to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. But now it felt meaningless. "What do you want, Jennifer?" he asked, taking a sip of his coffee. A shaky breath. Then, she admitted, "I made a mistake." Michael closed his eyes. He could picture her sitting in some dimly lit apartment, alone, the weight of her choices finally sinking in. The glamorous life she had imagined for herself had collapsed. Alan had discarded her like an old business card. The financial security she assumed would follow the divorce had never come. Her friends had moved on, leaving her stranded in the wreckage she had created. But Michael? He had survived. He had won. "Is that so?" he said, his tone neutral. I was stupid," she continued, her voice cracking. "I thought." She stopped herself. "I don't know what I thought." Michael could hear the raw regret in her voice. But regret wasn't the same as love. It wasn't the same as redemption. It was simply the realization that she had lost. "There's nothing left for us to say, Jennifer," Michael said finally. "But the kids, they're happy. They're safe." He let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "And they don't ask about you anymore." The silence that followed was heavier than words. Michael stood up, stepping onto the grass, feeling the cool earth beneath his feet. He had spent too much time walking through the fire of betrayal, but now he was free. With one final glance at the darkening sky, he pressed end call and walked toward his children's laughter, toward his future, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. Behind him,